Thank you for joining me. In today's video, I want to talk about civil liberties and in particular freedoms of speech and freedoms of the press. And I want to talk a little bit about the background philosophically behind these freedoms, which are often taken for granted in a knee-jerk sort of a way in Western liberal democracies, including especially the United States. Why do we value freedom of speech? Why do we value freedom of the press? Of what worth are these things in the establishment, maintenance, and protection of a civil society? And the perspective from which I'll be talking is that of Robert George in his well-known book, Making Men Moral, which provides a background defense from a natural law perspective of civil liberties which have been taken for granted from a variety of different worldviews for many generations in Western liberal democracies. For starters, let's talk a little bit about the value of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is instrumentally valuable on the natural law conception. It doesn't necessarily have value in and of itself, but it does have value in that it contributes to the development of human cooperation. And human cooperation, that is friendship or relationality, is an inherent good, an intrinsic good on the natural law view. So that which contributes to relationality, cooperation, friendship, is something that has value by extension for its instrumental ability to promote that which is inherently, intrinsically valuable. Now, not all freedom of speech is valuable, of course, for its promotion of relationality. There are often in Western democracies certain time, place, and manner restrictions on freedom of speech. For instance, shouting fire in a crowded theater, the famous example, is not protected freedom of speech because it doesn't contribute at all in any conceivable way from any conceivable perspective to the achievement of the good of relational connection. In fact, it precisely is intended to hinder such things. Obscenity historically was not seen as protected freedom of speech. That changed in the 1960s and 1970s with some of the loosening sexual morals in the Western democracies. But for a long time, obscenity was not thought to be something that contributed to genuine human relational connection or friendship or the ability to build a civil society together that is part of an edifying, flourishing whole. Other forms of freedom of speech are also not protected. For instance, deception in the service of a treasonous enterprise is not seen as a protected form of freedom of speech because it doesn't contribute, again, to a civil society and the development of a civil society that edifies the citizen body and contributes to our collective flourishing. There are also other forms of freedom of speech that might potentially be restricted by virtue of the place or the manner in which they are taking place. So if neo-Nazis were to march through neighborhoods populated by Jews shouting pro-Holocaust slogans, this is intentionally provocative, and most would agree that this is not the sort of an exercise of freedom of speech that contributes to human relational connections. We could think also of other derogatory comments that might, depending on the setting in which they are offered or made, might not necessarily be something we would want to protect as freedom of speech. Nevertheless, because of its importance to the promotion of relational connection and the establishment of a strong social fabric and infrastructure, even in spite of certain restrictions, time, place, and manner restrictions on freedom of speech, from a natural law perspective such as that offered by George in Making Men Moral, it is important to presume that freedom of speech be protected. That is, freedom of speech needs to be favored by a presumption in the court system and in the political system that should promote it and allow it except in extreme circumstances where it can be clearly demonstrated by a high bar epistemologically of demonstration that the speech is not contributing to human relational connection and in fact is actively damaging or hindering it. So one more time, the perspective offered by the classical liberal views of most neo-natural law theorists these days is that freedom of speech is instrumentally valuable because of its service in the promotion of the good, the intrinsically valuable good of relationality of friendship. And freedom of speech should enjoy a presumption in political society, in the courts of law, and in legislation. That is, it should usually by default be protected, except in circumstances where it clearly violates our ability to connect with each other relationally, hence the time, place, and manner restrictions. Freedom of the press is a species of free speech, and so it too can be defended along similar grounds. It's a species of written free speech, and it too can be defended as instrumentally valuable to human relational connections and to the establishment of a civil framework that is itself of intrinsic value. On the neo-natural law view, there are a variety of different goods and a variety of different ways to achieve such goods. It is absolutely essential that we communicate with each other through speech in the achievement of the various goods that human life can be oriented towards. And it is absolutely essential that the great majority of the time that speech be protected so that our ability to cooperate in pursuit of such goods is not impeded. After all, most people's flourishing and ability to pursue the basic goods of human life would be greatly undermined if they were not able to do so in community, in cooperation with others. And community, of course, requires speech, hence the instrumental value of freedom of speech and freedom of the press.